Well, hello, friends. Tony Howard here, and I'd like to introduce you to a new webinar at Astrology University, the Ascendant-Descendant Axis, Self, and Other. And I have Carole Taylor here with me, who's going to be presenting the webinar to tell you a little bit about it. So thanks so much for joining me today, Carole.
I'm delighted to be here, Tony.
So this is your first webinar with us. So after we talk about the webinar, I'll have you tell folks a little bit about yourself. But I wonder if we could just start by talking about what you think some of the pitfalls people might face when they're interpreting the Ascendant-Descendant axis. This is something that we talk about a lot in astrology. It's maybe one of the core basic ideas. It's part of the four angles. So you've been teaching for so long, and I just wonder what any kind of pitfalls people face when they're starting to interpret these angles.
I think the primary one perhaps is not to see them as an axis. I think that's a big pitfall. It's a big problem because to me they are inextricably linked. They are the ascendant and the descendant are two different experiences of our personal horizon, if you like. The ascendant perhaps says something about what we think we know about ourselves, how we inhabit the space, as it were. And the descendant is kind of a shadow space. So it's maybe the things that we don't think we know about ourselves or that we don't want to know about ourselves. In my experience, the ascendant often describes maybe traits in our character that were endorsed right from the start. And then, of course, the descendant, by extension, is maybe some of the things that were not endorsed, and we've got to try and find them. So they're two sides of the same story, if you like, and one completes the other. So for me, looking at them both as an axis, an integrated axis, is absolutely seminal.
Perfect. Well, can you tell folks a little bit more about what you're going to share in the webinar?
Yes, of course. So you're mentioning the four angles there. And so the four angles are, of course, foundational points in a chart. Astronomically, they link heaven and earth. And so they say something about how incarnate life maybe acts as a container for our development. So they're important in defining, I think, how we see and relate to the world around us through our outward sense of identity at the ascendant, through relationships at the descendant, and of course through our sense of family history at the IC, and through our sense of future path at the MC. And of course, I'm focusing here in this seminar just on the ascendant-descendant. So the first thing I'm going to do is just briefly describe a little of the ancient thinking about these 2 points, in as much as that helps us to amplify our interpretation of them in a chart. I'll then look at the ascendant in detail. So as the inception point of the chart, it carries the notion of birth and beginning, which allows us to start seeing our chart in developmental rather than static terms. So placing the concept of birth at the ascendant, for instance, gives us a sense that the 12th house describes our experience of gestation in the womb and the energies that we might have absorbed subliminally during that 9-month process. And so then the ascendant describes the circumstances around our birth and how this might set up our expectations of how life is and our role within it. What is it that we expect to find out there? How do we adjust ourselves to it? And how do we then enact each new beginning and enter into each new experience? So I'm going to talk about this and then move more deeply into our possible experiences around the ascendant and its different meanings, including touching on the role of the chart ruler as a kind of tutelary deity or daimon, which is present, I think, at our birth and points towards activities and territories which act as a lens for the development of the rest of the chart. And I'll illustrate all of this with a look at a couple of charts, just to see the ideas in action. And I will bring in aspects from planets to the ascendant as factors which shape all of this, as well as, of course, touching on what happens when we experience a transit to the ascendant. And then I'll look at the meaning of the descendant in detail. And then, of course, importantly, we'll link the ascendant to the descendant as one integrated axis, where the descendant is like the kind of shadow or counterpart to the ascendant and describes the modes and behaviours which we don't identify with ourselves, but which we instinctively long to encompass, and which we, of course, so often encounter through other people. We'll think about the psychological concept of projection, but we'll also see it in the context of Jung's notion of individuation, which he suggested begins in earnest at midlife. We'll think about that. And we'll also think about how the Descendant describes important aspects of the process of growing deeper into ourselves. And again, then we'll anchor that in a couple of chart examples, and we'll add in aspects to the Descendant and the ruler of the sign on the Descendant, so we get a more complete picture. And just then finally, I'll be looking at each of the sign pairings across the Ascendant-Descendant, just to give some ideas for interpretation. I'll only have time, I think, to talk briefly about each pairing, but I want to give everyone some ideas, their own chart to take away with them. I think it's actually very valuable because it does encourage us to see the Ascendant-Descendant as an integrated axis. I think that will quite happily fill our time.
Beautiful. It sounds amazing, and I know that some folks will love that last part too, even if it's brief. But just to give some suggestions for how to start working with the material, either in your own chart or with clients. So it just sounds like you're going to pack this one with so much useful information. So I can't wait to see it, Carole. Well, for those of you out there who haven't come across Carole's work, Carole, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and your approach to astrology?
Sure. I trained at the Faculty of Astrological Studies in the UK, and I gained my diploma in 2000. So I've been an astrologer for 23 years now. And really everything for me focuses around client work and also teaching. I do speak at conferences and do sort of longer workshops and whatever, but teaching and client work right at the heart of everything that I do. I have now left the faculty, so I've got some other ventures going. I'm doing my own teaching, various organisations that I'm setting up and working for and with. So I'm very much looking forward to this particular webinar. As you say, it's my first one at the Astrology University, so it's very, very exciting. And although the Ascendant-Descendant seems like maybe quite a basic thing for us to try and get to grips with, or, it's right there in the foundation course for most people. Actually, I think there are deeper layers to it which can really help to focus us. And it's, of course, one of the first places that you might go in when you start to talk with a client, because the Ascendant is so much about the entryway. And so I think it's very valuable to think about some of the deeper layers of resonance and meaning in relation to this axis, because if we are working with clients, then of course that's really seminal.
Beautiful. Thanks for that. Well, if your curiosity is already piqued and you're ready to sign up, just head over to astrologyuniversity.com/events, where you'll find this webinar listed. Again, it's the Ascendant-Descendant axis with Carole Taylor. And if you have any trouble finding it, just reach out to our help team, help@astrologyuniversity.com. If you're tuning into this video after we've already presented it live, it's available to watch instantly through streaming or download. And you can just find it by searching for Carole's name, and it's Carole Taylor. So just search for her name using the search bar on any page of the website. And again, reach out to our help team if you have any trouble finding it. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Carole. I can't wait to see you soon in the webinar. And until then, take good care, folks.